I tend to follow the lead of the late, great Howard Zinn, who advocated disidentifying ourselves with the government. Don't say they gave their lives for their country. Say their country stole their lives. Their country killed them. Don't say we bombed that country yesterday. Say the United States government bombed that country, and I'm going to do something to try to hold it accountable and stop it and prevent the next one. I think, you know, the argument for saying we just bombed Iraq is that we must remember our responsibility for it and our taxes, those who pay taxes, and it's an argument to stop paying taxes in some people's minds and so forth. I think it's outweighed by the argument against using that language, which suggests that I identify with this 5% of humanity, that I disidentify with the other 95%, that I support whatever the US government does because I did it. I think those considerations outweigh the other by far, and we ought to completely eliminate the practice of saying we did this, and even of saying my government, unless you're going to make clear that you are actively engaged in resisting that government. It is the government of the place you happen to reside at the moment. That's all, if you're a world citizen. I think, I don't, on the other hand, I don't, maybe I disagree with you on everything, I don't know, but I don't, I think, agree with you on avoiding saying the word war, like it's Lord Voldemort's name or something. You know, I think we have to eliminate war and we have to create peace. And I think in most of our advocacy, we have to state both of those because they're both important, because they're the whole picture, and because there are always people in the room who only love one and hate the other, and other people who love the other and hate the first one. And but I think we obviously have to do both. We have to recognize what war is and end it, and we have to recognize what we're going to replace it with and talk about that and draw a picture of that and make it visible to people.
But I do think that a lot of times the peace movement and the activities we do and stuff, we concentrate so much on war and not enough on peace. You know, I wish that we could more, you know, like what we're talking about today, well, constructive things that we can do to promote peace.
When we fail to communicate to people that there's an alternative, that there's a way to run the world without war, then we're really failing because they aren't going to join with us. But there are 101 organizations in this country, including the United States military, that say they're for peace, but will not say they're for ending war. And when you're for peace in your heart, and you're for peace in your community, and you're for peace through massive bombing campaigns and so forth, you're not for ending war. And so I think it is important to have places where people can identify and work toward the goal of ending war. And if you can't say it out loud, it's going to be hard to do it.
No, I just mean anti and, you know, just the anti stuff all the time. Saying for is better than whatever. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
I like the cooperative conversation things.
Just a little add-on that I feel the same way about saying we. A friend of mine always says to me, we're doing this and we're doing that. And I say, don't say we, I'm not doing it. It's the United States government. I'm divorced from them. And lately, I don't even like to write the U.S. does this. I like to write the USG government does this.
Hi. Sort of if any of you or anybody here has any idea, any specific steps that we can take to end the United States' unshakable support, U.S. government's unshakable support for the Israeli conquest and dispossession of the Palestinians. As probably most of you know, about last month, the U.S. Senate voted 100-0 to support the Israeli war, and that's revolting to me. And one idea that I had lately was to I've asked the Jewish Voice for Peace chapter to consider holding a forum on, is Senator Schumer's unshakable support for Israel a good policy for U.S. Jews? And I think that would get Schumer's attention, and I think we have to get his attention because he's like the leader or one of the major leaders in the Senate and in the Congress on this issue. We need to find some way to move him to a different position. I don't think we can do it, but we need to make it unacceptable for him to continue along with what he's doing right now. Thank you.
Can we respond to
Oh, please.
Tom's question first? Yeah, Tom's seen the same thing. He and I have been active on the local Palestinian Rights Committee, and I've been a Palestinian solidarity activist for maybe 20 years. But it took the equivalent, I suppose, this is a slight exaggeration, but those of you who've experienced it will know what I'm talking about, a bit of a religious conversion, right? You grew up identifying with Israel, sympathizing with Israel, studying the Holocaust, otherwise identifying those two events and Judaism and Zionism, and otherwise not making distinctions that today we can make. So over the last 20 years or so, it's actually been cheering to me to see the slow but certain change, including in the peace movement. 20 years ago, it was very hard to carry a Palestinian flag in a peace rally. Sometimes you'd be physically attacked. Today, there's almost always a strong Palestinian solidarity component in any and all social movements. Jill's urgent call to convergence is happening among Palestinian solidarity activists as well. As to a practical thing Tom's familiar with is, of course, and probably many of you, the rest of you in this audience as well, but of course, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, I think, is one of the most exciting things that's come to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it's exactly the kind of nonviolent, pro-peace set of activities, isolating Israeli institutions, divesting from them, looking at the close connections between, for example, in my case, Israeli universities and the Israeli war machine. This now is seen as a significant threat. Some of you will recall the attempted legislation in this last session of the New York State Assembly to what? Essentially defund any public institution that was seen somehow as critical of Israel. It was quite an extraordinary event. It failed, thankfully, through pushback by people like you and us. So, Tom, I'm actually more hopeful on that front, including even after the most, the atrocious war crimes and crimes against humanity that was the latest Israel assault on Gaza. I think those sort of brutal policies, days are numbered.
Just quickly, I would add that there has also been dramatic improvement, if many miles to go, in the U.S. media, including the corporate media, on this topic. And part of that is because of Palestinian voices and the existence of the internet and bloggers and radio hosts getting those voices out there. And part of it is the result of the Israeli voices getting more blatantly and openly and unapologetically genocidal. And I wrote an article titled various places, something like "Genocide Goes Mainstream," quoting top Israeli officials openly advocating genocide. And if that were to happen in the Iranian government, the Russian government, you would hear about it night and day. But you do hear about it a little bit, so that's progress. And I think if we work with BDS internationally and we get the international organizations to hold Israel accountable, pressure will come on the U.S. Congress eventually. It's always last, the U.S. Congress. So that it hasn't come around doesn't mean there hasn't been tremendous progress.
And just to second that motion, enormous progress in public opinion as well, reflected in the peace movement, but reflected more generally. Polls now show that the American public is about evenly divided in terms of support for Israel right now. So people are not at all certain that this is a good thing. And if you then go down the age spectrum and you get to people, I think, like under 50, the polling was really shocking, that once you got to like under age 50 and definitely under age 30, that the numbers really shifted and there was very little support for U.S. policy and growing support for Gaza and actually for Hamas. And I find it really interesting to think about, not only sort of the drivers. Why is public opinion changing here? It's both because of the incredible racism that's been revealed and fascism on the part of Israelis. Not all, there's a brave peace contingent among Israelis who are standing up under very difficult circumstances, and that's been wonderful to see. But what's been, I think, so shocking to the world is to see what it looks like to watch people who are under fire, who are really being shot at like fish in a barrel, who are told you got 1 minute to leave your home, and then they run to another area in Gaza, and then they're targeted there, and they're caught in the crossfire, and they're caught if they're trying to run. It's been such a incredibly emotional and shocking window into what it looks like to be a civilian caught in the crossfire. And I find it really interesting to think about how the lessons learned here are not only about Israel and Gaza and the use of overwhelming force, but more generally what war looks like when you start having personal stories coming out. It's not as if Syria, is any better. And there are, over 100,000 people who've now died in Syria. So we're sort of seeing in Gaza what war looks like. And I think that's just a really important lesson, for us to kind of keep the heat on, that war is really, it's horrific. And to see it, is to be moved to oppose it and, to really call for its end and its abolition.
I don't have a policy solution. I wanted to make a point about human dynamics here. Often and always in conflict, you hear about this main front, like Israel versus Palestinians. But as in other conflicts, there are all these multiple fronts of conflict within each side. And if people were more aware of that, they would realize that a war along the main front doesn't solve all those problems. So even if Israel got rid of all the Palestinians, they wouldn't live happily ever after. And vice versa. If Israel were gone, the Palestinians wouldn't live happily after. There's so many divisions amongst the Palestinians. Say in Israel, from what I've read, there are secular Jews, Zionist Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews who believe in living according to the ways of the 1700s and 1800s. There's the Messianic Jews who want the expanded Israel. And the hatreds between some of the people within each of those groups is atrocious. And the ultra-Orthodox Jews who dress very conservatively from the past, they feel from the secular Jews what it must have been like to be living in Germany, during Nazi Germany. They know what anti-Semitism feels like. Then the secular Jews, when they look at the ultra-Orthodox, they think, now I know how an anti-Semite feels, because I feel the same way. So the hatred is great. And then even within the groups, like within the Orthodox sect, or within the Reform Jewish sect, the hatreds within there are even worse. And so it's those hatreds that have to be resolved. If you're going to fight a war to solve that conflict, what, are you going to fight wars along all those other little fronts of conflict too? And even from what I've read before Israel was made, there was disagreement. There were Zionists and anti-Zionists. And then amongst the Zionists, there were revisionary Zionists, or more radical ones who wanted violence. And then off of the violent Zionists broke off even more violent Zionists. And off of them broke off people who actually became some of the leaders of Israel. So I just think it's important to work locally on those fronts of conflict that exist within each side.
It's been such a wonderful and worthwhile day. The only regret I have is that this place isn't jammed with people to hear you. And I think it would be, I thought, Maureen and John have done such a marvelous job of putting this conference together. How can we help them to get more of an audience of the young people and people beyond the choir? Almost all of us here are with you 100% already. So I'm going to ask those of us who are here maybe to pledge that we will put some effort into filling this place so that it's standing room only next year with young people and people who have never attended a peace conference before. I hope we'll do that.
I would just note that most of the people viewing this event will be viewing it in the coming days via video. And Jay over here is making a terrific video, and I'm going to drive home and put it on the internet, and you should spread it around and make a highlight video of the past, of this year's event and the highlights of the upcoming event next year, and use it all over social media, and actively reach out to young people during the school year and wherever and whenever they can be reached. And perhaps for this event, or maybe it's for another event, reach out to other organizations with different points of view to include them in the room. It might be a little bit different type of event, but it might be far more interesting to have different perspectives interacting with each other. But young people can be brought around, especially if they're part of the organizing. And there are going to be young people up here on the stage and not just down there. So I recommend including them. We need them.
Ditto that. Having organizations in at the ground level so that this conference is produced and organized by people who are also working to promote peace in the inner cities, peace from sort of a truce or a ceasefire from our militarized police, peace on the home front around the evictions of people in foreclosures, and peace perhaps in some way that includes education and that includes sort of the right to education and to health care and to ending student debt. If you can get those issues in on the ground floor, and with the concept of building a stronger coalition to fight peacefully on all of those issues at the local and community level, then you're going to have some real excitement. And I would add in, get some hip hop and some spoken word, and and some good music, and it will be an unstoppable, amazing, wonderful event.
Did you had a question? Okay, well, it's Phil too, and then we'll.
Oh, I've been waiting, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Maureen. No.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Very-
And I wanted to follow up because I want to talk to them, Pat's suggestion. I'm an old high school teacher, and I want to give 2 assignments. The first one is the one that Pat offered us. We left here last year with the promise to each other that we would try to seek more diversity for this conference this year, both in age, people of color. I think the vision of alternative views is an additional diversity that we need to look for. Could you all, right now, take that in as an assignment? And some people have gone, we're not all here. Share that assignment with other people who you think might be coming. Try to help us reach out so that next year this is a richer, fuller, more wonderful, increasingly growing effort. So that's the first assignment. Please take it seriously. The second one is, an awful lot of what we've been talking about is language. And we've been using words about that we don't always see in op-ed pieces, in our writing about current events, on the media. Words like compassion and love and solidarity and community and understanding and quest and transformation. Jill used the expression at some point today, when you can grab the mic. Second assignment, at least once this year, and share this assignment with whomever you can. Try to grab the mic, be it an op-ed, be it a letter to the editor, be it a piece for your newsletter. In some way, grab the mic and use the language in what you say of transformation. Try to bring this energy to what you say. So 2 assignments, I hope you take them seriously and share them if you can. Thank you.
Okay, we got hopefully one more question and then John and for the closing.
Yeah, I'd like to play with numbers, and I'm not very good at it, but the question I asked is, when did the oil prices go sky high? And so I looked at the price of the government's barrel price of oil at EIA, and so I plotted out, and then I said, you know, what did our policies have to do with that? And it turned out that, does anybody remember when George Bush said, bring them on? Does anybody, that was in July of 2003, just 2 months after the mission was accomplished. And, you know, before then, the price of oil was, you know, $20, $30 a barrel. Right after bring them on, in July of 2003, it went sky high. Now, what does that mean for us? You know, besides all the death and destruction of the people who deliver the bombs and the people who are on the receiving end, what does that happen? What does that, you know, there's other costs to this, to the world, our economy. And I was thinking about it, and then I read that Linda Rogers, now Linda Lawrence, I think, economist, Federal Reserve advisor, said that if the price of oil was below $80 or $90 a barrel, shale oil would not be profitable. They, you know, the bomb trains come through. There's 4 bomb trains coming through Kateri Peace Conference every day. Right, Dominic? Is that correct? And you know, they go through Buffalo, they go through Syracuse, Rochester, and Port of Albany is now a world, you know, shipping point. They ship it out to the West Coast, and they ship it down to Louisiana. Those are the 3 areas. But the cost of this war, the cost of the instability in the Middle East is enormous to this economy. You know, doubled the price of oil. And all that is all this instability in the Middle East, of the Gaza, bombing Iraq, humanitarian bombing of any country, you know, Afghan, the droning, all this hatred, you know, generates, you know, this hatred of us, as well as making the price of oil sky high. And that feeds back on the shale in the United States. So if we could bring a little bit of peace to the Middle East, you know, quiet man, God knows where that's going to come from. If we can bring it down to, you know, $80 a barrel, you know, 75, you know, these bomb trains that go by Kateri are going to stop, you know. So that's a goal. I mean, $10 a barrel is a viewable goal, I think. But somewhere in the Middle East, or, you know, there has to be some peace generated to do that. And the effect on the economy would be huge. Of course, the people would stop dying proportionally too. But anyways, okay.
Let me, you know, no doubt we ought to never again fight a war for oil, right? The 2 Gulf Wars clearly are about that, and yet $10 a barrel oil would actually make a more dangerous world than we live in now, I think.
Yeah.
In climate terms,
Exactly,
right?
yeah, you're right.
So yes, stop the oil trains. Yes, make sure Keystone XL pipeline does not happen. Let's leave the oil in the ground. 2/3 of currently proven reserves, we're told, have to stay on the ground.
Right.
But if anything, it probably should be more expensive in terms of a carbon tax, where the receipts then are distributed progressively, right? So that poor folks don't get hurt in a just transition to a green world.
Yeah, if it goes down, and then they could add the carbon tax back up, you know, and then that would also prevent it. So, yeah, right.
I would just point out that the price of oil and the price of gas going up is not seen as a downside to everyone. And when we're told, you idiots, it was not a war for oil, look at the price of gas, it costs more. Well, it wasn't a war for us. It was a war for oil corporations. And it's not a war for the helpless people on the mountaintop. It's a war for the oil companies in Kurdistan. And so we have to remember that oil drives very different U.S. policies regarding humanitarian pretenses and real humanitarian concerns for many people in the government from how our government behaves how the U.S. government behaves, follow my own advice, in other parts of the world. And I think the idea that is quite common at events like this one to hear about, which goes under the banner peak oil, has to be abandoned immediately, urgently, because at least 80% of what's already known to exist has to be left untouched in the ground or we all die. So the idea that there's some point that's going to be reached in the future when it runs out or it's too hard to get, sort of feeds into the idea of continuing to exploit the oil. The oil must not be exploited, foreign or domestic, or we're all going to die. So we have to stop the bomb trains. We also have to stop the pipelines they're building and their plans to build an export station in Cove Point in Maryland, or we're going to continue down a path of destruction, just of a different variety.
And to add to that, we also have to stop the fracking, which is another, train bomb in and of itself, and represents another enormous and vast reservoir for destroying the climate. And there's another intersection here of foreign policy, which is not well understood, but it's perhaps not coincidence that undermining Russia's natural gas supply to Europe through our hostilities around Ukraine and cutting off the flow of Russian gas opens up the vast markets for U.S. fracked gas to go into Europe. And there are real questions about the extent to which gas rather than oil is motivating hostilities between Ukraine and Russia and the potential for a World War III, which seems to be accelerating. So, I myself keep coming back to the fact that there is not a small solution here, because money is so incredibly concentrated into so few hands right now, and the safeguards between money and buying out policy have been so cut back. We've reached that point where Chief Justice Louis Brandeis said, we have a choice. Either we can have a democracy or we can have vast concentrations of wealth into a few hands. That's what we have right now. And there's not going to be a simple fix to this. It's not like solving it in one area is going to withdraw the power from the forces right now, which have lots of money, incredible military stockpiles, militarized police, and so on. It's going to take a lot of us acting together peacefully, in a strategic way, with an agenda that achieves all of the essentials for surviving. And that includes demilitarization, ending fossil fuels and nuclear by 2030, and creating jobs to put food on the table and ensure that we have a productive economy, and a bunch of other things. But those three things as really core issues. I think no matter how you look at it, if you look at it deeply, we're not getting out of here alive unless we do all those things rather quickly. So, I think this is a great jumping off point here. We're at the point where we're going to choose. Either we're at the breaking point or we're at the tipping point. So let's make it a tipping point, and we can do that together and only together.
Thank you.